And you've already come across these in your book, but I just want to go into a little bit more detail about what they are, how you form them, and when to use them. So the short form adjectives that you've already come across are ones like rad, готов, занят, свободен, right? And as you can see, they're all a shorter version of a long form adjective, except for rad, which only occurs as a short form. So, and if you think about glad in English, it also pretty much only occurs as a short form in the sense that it's only used as a predicate. So you would say like, she is glad, but you wouldn't use glad to describe, like she is a glad person. So, but готов, we know, right? Готовый, занятый, свободный. These are all the long form versions. So we're going to use short form adjectives, or we'll use the short form version of the adjective when the adjective is used as a predicate. So you'll see it'll come after to be. Even if, like in Russian, you know how there isn't to be usually in the present tense. So even if that быть is actually omitted from the sentence, if it's implied, then you can use a short form. Like film, был or будет интересен. So we'll talk more about when to use them, but I just want to explain first how we form them. So we can see up here that we pretty much are removing the ending, that adjectival ending, to get our masculine version. And then for feminine, if we're describing a feminine noun, we add a, neuter, we add o, and plural, add we or e. So they look like nouns, these short form adjectives. There are some exceptions or rules that you have to pay attention to. Up here, свободен is an example. So свободный, so if we were to get rid of this ending, we now have a cluster of consonants. So we're going to insert a ya, свободен. And so you'll always insert ya into a consonant cluster that ends in n. And always insert o into a consonant cluster that ends in k. And then that's just for masculine version or the masculine form. once you add an a or an o or an e at the end, you can get rid of that inserted vowel. So let's look at some examples. Красивый. Right, beautiful. So we're going to get rid of the ending, and we'll be left with красив. Right, and then if we want the, so that's the masculine, and if we want the feminine, we add an A. Красиво. Neuter, we add an O. Красиво. Красиво. And plural, we add E. Красивый. So that one's pretty straightforward. If we look at another one, бедный, right? Poor. So first we'll get rid of our ending, our adjectival ending. And you'll see that we're left with a consonant cluster. And because the last letter is N, we're going to insert a ya for the masculine form. So we'll get beden. And I'm going to write the accent because the accent tends to shift. If we add an a, biedna, biedna, biedny. So pay attention to where the accent falls. And then look at one more. Bliski. So near, or we're gonna get rid of this ending. And again, you'll notice that there's now a cluster of consonants ending in K this time. So we're gonna insert an O for the masculine form. And we'll get blizak. Близко. Близко. Близкий. So it's pretty straightforward. You just have to remember that consonant cluster, and that's only going to affect the masculine form. So that's how we make a short form adjective from a long form adjective. So now let's talk about when and how to use them. So like I said before, they can only be used like a predicate. After a linking verb, usually to be. Быть, right? Even if that быть is omitted in the present tense. And no noun can follow the adjective or be described by this adjective. Only a noun coming before the short form adjective can be described by it or is described by it. So that's an important thing to remember. So you couldn't say у нас сейчас. If you want to say right now we have a full house, so you're going to choose between polny or polon. In this case, you can't use the short form. you have to use the long form because the noun is coming after. So u nás polný dom, right? Because you're describing that noun that comes after. But you could say, or if you were choosing between these two, and your sentence was u меня dom since we're describing the house, so this noun is coming before the adjective we're describing. So I have a house full of people. Then you can use the short form. У меня дом полон гостей. So full of guests, right? Because we're not describing the guests, we're describing the house, and that noun comes before. And as you can see, the short form adjective will agree in gender and number with the noun preceding it, or the noun that it's describing. So it agrees with gender, number of noun preceding it. The noun it's describing. And so if you're not sure which form to use, remember that the short form adjective can only be in the nominative case. So you're not going to use a short form adjective in any other case. You wouldn't say, so let's say you're trying to decide between свободный and свободен. Мы живем в какой-то стране. Okay, so we have to use the long form because it's following v, so it's going to be in the prepositional case, which means it's not the nominative case, which means it cannot be the short form. So мы живем в свободной стране. All right. So often the short form is more formal or bookish. So this is the form you're going to choose the short form in your written Russian, and you'll probably use the long form in spoken Russian. Because you could say "Эта книга интересная" or "Эта книга интересна." So if you wanted to decide between the two, they're both correct. They both mean that the book is interesting, and you'll probably choose the short form "Эта книга интересна" if you're writing it, and the long form "интересная" if you're speaking it. So it's the written form. Not always, but often. Another point to decide between the two, sometimes the short form means a temporary state, while the long form means permanent state. So let's look at some examples. Он такой здоровый. He's so healthy. He's such a strong, healthy individual in general, right? Like in his childhood, as a young man, as an older gentleman, he's just a healthy dude. But, so this is a permanent state, right? We're describing his person. But we would use a short form if we said on был болен, но теперь он здоров. Right? So he was sick, but now he's well. So he was temporarily sick. Maybe last week he had the flu, but now he's well again. But we're not saying that he's this healthy, soldier. We're just saying that right now he's not sick. So this is temporary. And one of the short form adjectives from your book that you're pretty familiar with is занятый, or занят, right? Sorry, so the long form is занятый. And this is another one that it sort of changes meaning depending on whether it's short or long, or doesn't change meaning but changes the idea of whether it's a permanent or temporary state. So if you say он занятый, you're just saying he's a busy guy. He's always busy. But if you said он сейчас занят, it means that right now he's busy. So that is pretty basic or pretty straightforward. Okay, another way that we can choose between the long or the short is that for some adjectives, that describe quantifiable properties, the long form indicates the general property of the object, like it's big, it's small, it's narrow or long, whatever, right? Just describing a dress, for example. It could be a big dress or a small dress, just compared to all the other dresses. That's its general property. And the short form indicates excessiveness, or that the object is too big or small or narrow or long. With respect to a certain person, object, or circumstance. So you can use the long form to say, this dress is long. Like compared to the other dresses hanging on the rack, this dress is long. But you would use the short form to say, this dress is too long for me, or this dress is too long for my daughter. So, and this isn't with all adjectives. These are just some adjectives that describe quantifiable properties, right? We could take out a measuring stick and measure how long the dress is and say, oh, nope, sorry, it's too long. So, это платье длинное, right? So, compared to other dresses, that dress is long. Это платье длинно. So, this dress is too long. Natasha. Let's say. So this dress is too long for Natasha. Or you could say on молод для этой работы. So he is too young for this work because of the short form too, right? Another way to choose between the long and the short. So if the predicate adjective is followed by a complement, it must be in the short form. And pay attention to complement. It's not a complement with an I, like you have nice hair. It's a word or a phrase that completes the sense of the subject or the object or the verb. So, for example, мы готовы ехать в аэропорт. Right? So here's our complement. And because it's following the predicate adjective, it's got to be in the short form, which it is. Or the свободно делать что хочешь. So you're free to do as you wish, or as you want. And these are infinitives, right? But they can also be a prepositional phrase. So these are followed by infinitives. Он очень близок с отцом. So this is our prepositional phrase. And we had to use the short form, or one that you know from your book. Я похожа на маму. There's our prepositional phrase. Она готова к экзамену. So she's prepared for the test, or she's ready for the test. And the short form adjective, because it's acting it's as a predicate, it's functioning as a predicate, it can govern the case like a verb would, right? So the short form adjective can govern the case like a verb. A long form is not going to do this. The long form can be in any case, and the short form can only be in the nominative case. But this short form has this ability, because it's acting like a predicate, to govern the case. So, for example, они рады чему? Right, that's our question. Встреча. Right, so the meeting is put into the dative case because of our short form adjective. It determined the case. Мы очень благодарны. Кому? To whom are we grateful? Вам. Мы очень благодарны вам. One more example. Девушка Volna. Chim. What is she ill with? Angina. Right? Tonsillitis. So when you are deciding between a short or a long form adjective, there are a couple things that you can keep in mind. If the adjective is going to be in any case other than the nominative case, it's got to be a long form that you choose, not the short form. If the adjective is going to govern the case, then it's got to be the short form. If it's a formal bookish style that you're going for, choose the short form. If it's spoken colloquial, just, regular Russian, then you're probably going to opt for the longer form. Remember that there are some of these short form adjectives that indicate a temporary state, and there are some short form adjectives that imply that something is too or excessively whatever big. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you're deciding between short or long form.